It's Mountain Monday, so you know what to do. Breathe in. And out. And breathe in. And out. So again, the reason Mountain Mondays are sort of a zen shtick is because the weekends tend to be crazy for those of us that spend any time on the internets. And this weekend was especially crazy. In part, not entirely, but in part, because of that ruling that came down in the Gregory Allen Elliott case, the Twitter criminal harassment case, and he was found not guilty, which I think is the right verdict. I think it's the right verdict because of the way our criminal harassment laws are written here. But it doesn't seem that anybody on one of the poles of the culture war was happy with this outcome. Even the people who were, giving money to his legal campaign and pro-free speech, pro-free speech, they're acting like they lost. They're so angry and attacking people online. And of course, the people who consider themselves, safety advocates, online safety advocates, are very upset, most notably people who are part of women's activist groups. And I found it very interesting that the press referred to this the complainants in the case as women's activists, not feminists. And I'm very glad for that, because it is a different thing. A woman's activist is a feminist, but a feminist is not necessarily an activist. And so I'm glad they drew that line. But I tried to dig into the information as much as I could. I read the decision. Like I said, I agree with it. And the reason I agree with it is because it really seems like the stepping stones in a criminal harassment complaint weren't filed here, because I've been involved in having to deal with the police over criminal harassment stuff. And more than once, unfortunately. That happens when you work in the media for any period of time. And the first step to a criminal harassment complaint is you go to the police, you make your statement, and the police go to the person and give them a formal caution, which is done for two reasons. One, it usually solves the problem. When the cops show up at someone's door, things become less fun to do stuff on the internet. But it also makes sure they are aware that the behavior is, it's being received as intimidating or threats to their safety. And it seems like that didn't happen in this case. It seems like, according to the decision, what it hinged on was not whether or not the guy harassed these women, which the judge says, he did. But before everybody starts getting upset with me, the judge did sort of indicate there was sort of some harassing back as well. And it's so stupid, guys. Like, this whole thing should not have ended up in court. It was a massive slap fight over, apparently, a fight over a video game that just went way beyond ridiculousness. They were tweeting in the same hashtags, and that was considered trying to continue to communicate with them behind a block. It just makes my head hurt to think about. But what it came down to is the judge believed that there was reasonable doubt that the women involved were actually afraid of this guy. They feared for their safety. Not because there wasn't necessarily cause for them to fear for their safety, but because they continued to engage after that point. And I think this is sort of where I'm getting to. This is why it's on Mountain Monday. I think this is the important point. All the screaming and all the yelling and all the name calling and the swearing and the put downs and the call outs and all the crazy stuff that has been going on the internet since this verdict came down. And I mean before, because there were some, political operatives really fanning the flames of this thing. And I can't stand it when people do that. I think that trials are trials for a reason. And I think that um, people deserve their day in court, and they should be able to have that without being tried in the press. I get it sells papers and certain high profile trials that are cameras in the courtrooms and everything like that. But personally, I think that if a trial is going to become a major media circus, you either have like a feed that people, if they want, can go in on the internet and see the parts that the public, has the right to see. Like, we should see everything the jury sees. Or media blackouts until a certain point, because what you don't want is what happened to this guy. He got tried in the press before there was even one day in court. And that's not right. Now, I don't think he acted especially maturely. I don't think anybody did in this situation. And that's a different issue than free speech rights. This is an issue that we come down to of expectations and consequences when you're on the internet. And I think that failed on both sides of this very weird case. And I mean, on the one side, people who decide to make their opinions public on Twitter, you have to be prepared that other people are going to respond. They are public statements, right? It's easy to forget just how many people see certain tweets, especially if somebody decides to retweet them to start trouble, or worse, take a screen capture of them and post it to their account behind a block so you can't see what they've actually said. You can't see the framing. All of a sudden, you just have all these people yelling at you. You're going, what's going on? Like, why? It happened to me over this situation. One of the same operatives that whipped everybody up took one tweet I made in a series of, it was 9 all told, 7 that were really like super focused. But he took one in the chain of them and pulled it out of context, and it completely changed the meaning. And what it was is that, it's a reminder that the financial hardship that Gregory Allen Elliott was under to pay for his legal bills is a really harsh reminder that freedom of speech doesn't mean freedom from consequence of that speech. And people went crazy on me. And I don't get it. I don't understand why people got so upset with that statement, even in isolation, because, what the guy didn't forward was, I said that, this is also an indication that radical feminist tactics are outside the norms of society. They don't work. We need moderation. But even that statement, freedom of speech doesn't mean freedom of consequences from speech. The very same people who started yelling at me over that are the people that have thrown that line in my face when it's convenient for them. And this is where we find our zen. Because, the reality is this guy, yes, he racked up $100,000 in legal bills, but last I checked, he had something like $67,000 raised in a GoFundMe. And then Breitbart gave him $50,000 as well. So his legal bills are covered. And I'm sure it was very scary for him to have that daunting bill before that money came in. But, I mean, people who believe in this stuff, good. They're helping him cover his bills. So that's solved. There's no need to freak out on someone over this financial hardship that allegedly ruined this guy's life when the financial hardship, the problem was solved. And I'm a much bigger fan of using the internet to communicate and solve problems, or at least inform yourself about a problem, than using the internet to try to shout someone down and, just try to use strength in numbers, that whole dogpile or brigade technique, to show I'm wrong and you're right because I've got 100 people and you're just you. Strength in numbers doesn't make you right. And that trying to bully someone, which is what it is. I mean, if you think about it, if you come at someone swearing your head off and calling them an idiot, those are bullying tactics. They're ad hominem attacks. You're not being civil. And it's funny, the number of people who have come at me like, that's idiotic. And then I'm like, back off. What? I was being civil. people really aren't aware of what civility even means anymore. They think if they don't, swear using a censored word that they're being civil, but calling somebody mentally unstable or crazy or idiotic or something like that, that is not civil, guys. And yes, I know it's a very common way to talk to people, but that doesn't mean it's a civil way to talk to people. But this sort of tactic is not actually a really well-rounded acceptance of free speech. I'm sure that the people who, got really upset believe wholeheartedly that they believe in free speech. I believe that they do. The same way that, the accusers in this case actually did fear for their safety. They just didn't act like it. And how do you act like it? There's no perfect victims. That's true, but there are better victims than others. And, someone who claims to be an advocate of free speech shouldn't be trying to shout people down. And that's when they hit you with the free speech doesn't mean freedom of consequences from speech. If you're an idiot, I should be able to tell you you're an idiot. And it's like, and, then you mute them or block them, and then they complain that you denied them their free speech. It's a series of moving goalposts with these people, and that's why I don't really think they're truly free speech advocates. I don't even know the word. Like, their motivation seems to be guaranteed access to insult people. And that's not, freedom of speech doesn't mean guaranteed access to someone's ears or someone's eyeballs. That's not the way it works at all. And the other thing is that on the, free speech is a government protection. It is a protection. The actual language in, in the First Amendment, I'm not sure what it is in Canada's laws, but it's like the right will not be infringed. And, the wording's very deliberate. And that's because it means the government can't punish you for speaking. It means it can't lock you up. They can't seize your property, things like that. They can't. Free speech is protected. Now there are limits. And, defamation, harassment, these things, those are the limitations of free speech. And then hate speech was a whole kettle of fish. I don't want to get into it all. But that's all it means. When you're on a privately owned service like Facebook, like Twitter, like YouTube, the problem is all of a sudden we've stepped away from government-controlled society, and suddenly now we're in a private space. We're in a privately owned domain, and free speech means whatever they say it means. And this is why free speech on the internet is a very tricky thing. And being a free speech advocate in theory is much, much easier than being a free speech supporter in practice. And I know that because there's a lot of times people say some really nasty stuff about me, especially when I'm moderating YouTube comments. Like, things will get flagged as spam because people will use certain words, keywords that YouTube automatically dumps into the spam folder. And they're calling me every name in the book, and they're insulting me, and they really didn't like the video, and they didn't like what I do. But I approve the comment because it's not spam, right? I'm not going to abuse the spam filter to censor a comment just because I don't like it. But that's hard, right? That's very hard. I do take out sexually suggestive stuff when I see it. Stuff like that I do take out because that ruins other people's experiences. And I like to have a healthy comment section in these videos. But I think in order to maintain free speech, I have to play fair online. I shouldn't try to, shout someone down. I shouldn't be, you have to be careful. And it's sometimes hard to remember that, I've got, I don't know, something like 11,000 followers or something like that on Twitter, that I'll subtweet something not subtweet, sorry. I get that word wrong all the time. I get the meaning. I will retweet what someone said as a joke. You caption it. And I had to realize I have to be very, very careful when I do that. Because I don't intend to get that person dogpiled but sometimes it happened. And it wasn't intentional. I had to learn the hard way that, if somebody is, it's that whole punching up. I don't like calling it that, but it's making sure it's a battle of equals, so to speak, that the person has as many, if not more, followers than I do. They're a fairly public person. There is an expectation on their part that they will be critiqued, not somebody with 50 Twitter followers who would be possibly overwhelmed. And that's something you have to learn, and that's a responsibility because, free speech is responsible speech. But, on the other side, there's another side to this freedom of speech thing, in that you have to remember that these are open things. And if you decide to post your opinions on Twitter, people might get upset with you within reason. That doesn't give people the right to swear at you and call you names and, write nasty things about you on blogs and all those things. But, be prepared for some level of disagreement. And I really think that in this age of safe spaces, people forget that Twitter's not one. It isn't. It's just not. And that's not a bad thing. You just have to be aware of what it is. I mean, at this point, people start screaming at me, and I will only correct the record so many times before I just go, forget it, mute. Because after a while, people are deliberately not checking. They get so whipped up, they get so angry that they don't look to see the context, and they just scream. And at that point, no, you don't deserve access to a conversation with me. You can't keep it in bounds. And that because I'm very aware that if I start really coming down on someone who might just have phrased something wrong, I am, to an extent, infringing upon their right to express their opinions by, having other people come and agree and all that stuff. And most people that follow me are pretty good. They understand that, I can handle myself, especially in a discussion, and they don't try to jump in, right? And I appreciate that. But, sometimes it happens, and I'll make sure I go, hold on, guys, hold on. We're just talking here. Let's keep it one-on-one, or I will say to someone, let's take it to direct messages. I'll follow you. We'll work it out there. And I think free speech is something that everybody has a responsibility to help uphold, especially on these privately run social networks that are not required to give the same free speech protections that the government does. They can, moderated boards, moderated forums, and Twitter and Facebook are both moderated. That's what the support and reporting system is. They can cut anything they want. It's their rules. It's their terms of service. There's a reason you agree to the terms of service on these services so that they can set the rules. And by using their service, you agree to abide by those rules. And I'm very critical of the way Twitter handles harassment. I don't think Twitter handles harassment at all. I think Twitter handles offensiveness. It polices offensiveness. And most of the time, it only really polices images they deem to be offensive, not speech that's offensive. And I find that a very weird line to draw, but they don't really police harassment. They don't, because guess what? If they did, we wouldn't have had that court case, right? I think that court case is a massive failure on Twitter's part. Massive, massive failure. Shows how much work that company has to do. But I'm not willing to, how do I put this? I am glad the guy is not in jail. I don't think he deserved that. I wish that this would be a wake-up call to people on any sort of remotely polarized position on the political spectrum. That, I put this to my husband later, act like a grown-ass person. Like, that's my first reaction when I see some of this stuff. It's like, you are a grown-ass man or you are a grown-ass woman and you're carrying on like that. And then you complain when it comes back and bites you. Like, one of the tweets I put over the weekend was, it's called live by the sword, die by the sword, not live by the sword, whine when it cuts you. And this is the last thing I want to say. Don't engage radicals until you are, unless you are prepared for things to get real. They're called radicals. They're called activists for a reason. They act. They know the system. They can manipulate the system. They can make the system work in their favor because this is what they do and this is what their colleagues do. Don't engage them until you're ready for a real fight because it will get ugly. They will get exceptionally nasty. And I say this as somebody who, you know, I have had cops come at me just really aggressively because of lies other people told. I have had to deal with some very nasty accusations that come out of some of these echo chambers. I know these people, I know their profile, and I engage them directly as little as possible because it's just bad news. First of all, I don't want to give them any more attention. I do not want to condone what they do with any lighter heat. But also, it is not worth getting into, close combat with radicals. It's not. They have far fewer boundaries than you do. They have far fewer scruples than you do. And if you decide to engage with those people, there are consequences for that, and they sting. And I'd say especially for men, but they have other ways to mop the floor with women too. So I just, everybody just avoid people like that. People who are political operatives, people who are activists in something, whether you agree with the cause or not, just stay away from radicals because they live for the fight. And I think that's important for people to know, like, just mute them. Go about your business. You may have to step away, or you may have to not use a particular hashtag for a while. And that's when you start getting, but my free speech. Well, you still have the right to do it. You still are capable of using that hashtag as long as you're prepared to accept the consequences for it. And if you're not, don't do it. It should be common sense, but it's not anymore because people have had these repetitive messages put into them by radicals, by other radicals, by free speech radicals. And, you have to be prepared to accept the consequences of the discussions you end up wading into. And that was a point that got me in trouble. But I stand by it. And one of the things I hope you guys listening know about me is that I will stand by something, or I'll apologize for something. I won't try to go, well, I didn't say that, or no. Even if it's unpopular, and in this case, this was unpopular over the weekend, I stand by it. I stand by what I said. I stand by that you have to be prepared to accept the consequences of weighing into these public free-for-alls, these brawls with words. You have to be prepared to accept the consequences. No one's forcing you to use Twitter. And I say this as somebody who uses it for work. And I have been really reassessing whether Twitter is worth it professionally anymore. So far, I think it still is. So far, I think the pros outweigh the cons. But I'm telling you, those cons are getting larger and larger and more. I mean, the more that stock price drops, right? And the more it seems like, executives are leaving all that stuff, the more I think it might just not have a long shelf life. And it's better to cultivate, safer bets like Facebook. I have gone back to Facebook more because Twitter seems to be so on the ropes. But that was a bit of a digression. I hope that was a bit of context for people and a little bit of something to think about. That's what I try to do with Mountain Mondays. So we're going to wrap. Tomorrow we're back with, I can't talk about it because I can't talk about something that's under embargo until the embargo lifts. But there is something coming up tomorrow. But let's breathe to close out. Breathe in. And out. And breathe in. out.